Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Good to see all of you. If you're able to keep your cameras on, that is wonderful, but I understand if you cannot. Welcome to Cultivating Justice, a conversation about plant medicine, health, and liberation. Our guests are Emmanuel Brown, Shaye Lucero, and Carlos Pasola. Happy solstice, everyone. My name is Andrew Engel. I'm senior programmer at Reimagine. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. I've got glasses, very warm wool gray sweater. And in the back, I've got an orange painted wall. Our discussion tonight is the final program in a three-part series that examines the natural world as a space for us to grow and transform from our troubles. I want to thank our co-hosts tonight, Acorn Center for Restoration and Freedom and Decriminalize Nature. As some of you may know, we at Reimagine have been leaning into the process and philosophy of what's known as post-traumatic growth. PTG is evidence-based psychological research that allows us to recognize opportunity and experience change when struggling with grief, loss, and trauma. As a result of adversity, the idea is that it's possible to increase personal strength and optimism, to create more meaningful relationships, to have a deeper appreciation of life, and to discover spirituality and purpose. But I want to know that the concept of PTG isn't exclusive to Western science. The late Zen Buddhist monk and peace activist Thich Nhat Hanh has a simple expression that is another way of describing PTG. No mud, no lotus. And among Jews like myself, we can recognize PTG in the section of the Torah describing Jacob's frightening encounter with an angel. Jacob took a beating, was wounded, but that bizarre, traumatic event ultimately transformed him. He repaired his relationship with his estranged brother Esau. Tonight's program is also a table talk, which is a reimagined series created by and for underrepresented communities. The overarching question of table talk: what does it mean to live and die well? Specifically among groups that have been historically marginalized, who experience obstacles to healthcare and to death care. Our vision for table talk is that it becomes a regular booster shot of knowledge, empathy, cultural humility, and community. While these conversations are by and for underrepresented communities, everyone is invited to these spaces to witness, listen, and learn. You can view recordings of all table talks to date on our website. I'll be adding that to the chat so you can check that out. And I want everyone to know that we'll be sending out a recording of this discussion to everyone who has registered. Emmanuel, Shaye, and Carlos will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then we'll follow that with 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A from all of you. So for those who wish, you can click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screens to get a live transcript of what's being said. And during this table talk, feel free to send me a note in the chat if you're having any technical issues. I might be able to help you. In the new year, we're going to kick off a new monthly series, and the topic is money. How financial trauma might lead you towards new pathways. How can we build healthier relationships with money? How can we plan for ourselves and our loved ones from cradle to grave, in sickness and in health? And from a broader perspective, what small steps can we take to close the racial wealth gap? Again, you can register for all these events at letsreimagine.org. The majority of us are zooming in from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. I'm in Lenapehoking. That's where a large metropolis called New York is located on occupied land. I ask you to join me in acknowledging Indigenous communities in North America, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I'm stating this because it's a small step to continue the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and white supremacy. We're all interested in knowing where you are. If you have already put in the chat your location, wonderful. There's a very helpful map called native-land.ca. I will paste that also in the chat when I'm done, where you can learn about locations of Indigenous people, past and present. Okay. And now, I am going to let our wonderful guest speakers introduce themselves. But you can also have a look at their full bios in the event description listing. I will post that in the chat in a bit. So everyone, please welcome our speakers, Emmanuel, Shaye, and Carlos.
Good evening, everyone, or afternoon or morning. My name is Emmanuel Brown, and my pronouns are he and him. I am a Black person who is masculine in appearance with a small goatee, short haircut, glasses. I'm wearing a yellow sweater, and behind me is an image of yellow flowers with green leaves. I'm so grateful to be in this space this evening with you all, and really to have a moment to just share with you a little bit about me. So if we can get cozy with each other, we'll have a little bit of time to just for you all to learn more about me before we launch into the conversation with everyone. The place of starting is with my name. So my name is Emmanuel Highlander Brown, which is a name that I have chosen for myself that reflects my connection to 4 countries and a lineage of really powerful, imaginative Black folks, and to my parents who are both ancestors. Emmanuel is my father's middle name, and Highlander is my mother's middle name. And we were asked to talk about how has grief and trauma led us to the work that we currently do? And the stories, my parents' deaths literally are like the bookends to a very intense and compelling experience of accepting my role as a land steward. My mother died in 2016, shortly after I left my nonprofit job and started my own business. I didn't know what I was quite gonna do. I just knew that all the skills, all the education that I had acquired, I could probably put to better use than being a program director at a local nonprofit. I was like, it feels like this is very limited. And so I started to imagine myself being as effective as I possibly could within my own communities of Black folks, of queer folks, of trans folks, and what it would feel like every day to be putting my hands, to be putting my heart, to be putting all of my labor in assuring that my communities could experience freedom. So I did that in June. And I was, off to the races inside of all of the regular capitalistic things about being a solopreneur and how you got to work 60 hours and you got to do this and do that and, and then my father dies in September of 2016. I had, up until that point, this was the closest person to me that I had ever lost. So I wasn't actually familiar with grief. I knew it existed out in the world, but as a personal embodied experience, I didn't know what it was going to be to grieve. My father and I's relationship had many seasons of it. And it's in its final season, I got to witness him witness me and to see me. And I'm so grateful for that. But the grief of his dying and the circumstances of his death um, bowled me over, hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I am literally having to like either, there's no bereavement when you're a solopreneur. There's no, okay, this event is happening. I can't go, but I mean, what's the answer around that? There's none of this stuff. And I thought I was going to have to go back essentially into the job marketplace in order to just sustain myself, to move with grief. And then I had some really dear people in my life remind me that I started this work for the freedom of Black, queer, and trans people. And so wouldn't that include me? And they invited me to begin to ask community for help, to begin to talk about the grief that I was experiencing more publicly, to my clients, to the people that I was working with, and to begin to heal all the grief was bringing up. Fast forward, again, so I've been in the work for maybe 3 years, 2 years-ish. I got my stride going. I'm like, okay, I have this beautiful community that I know is with me because I've had this experience of grief. I brought people along with me. 2018 comes, the summer of 2018, and my mother suddenly dies. Again, I am struck by the overwhelmingness of the grief, the untethering. But I have the practice of going to community, letting them know what I need. And so I'm able to enact just a few small words, and then I fall into months of silence. Because my mother's and I's relationship was a little bit more complicated, a lot more complicated. And yet the untethering of no longer having parents on this planet was more than I could bear. At that time, I really was also in this conjure around land because community had asked me to be. And I didn't know what it was all going to mean, but I knew I wanted to create a place where people who were like me, people who maybe had complicated relationships with their own parents, people who come from immigrant families into the United States, people who maybe are just looking for a place to call home, could actually be. And so the freedom that grief provided me was the freedom to say, I can do exactly what my heart wants. Right? Like grief was like my biggest excuse. I was like, I'm grieving. My parents are dead. I'm doing everything that my heart wants to do. That's it. And so in following my heart, by August of 2019, I was signing the dotted line on 8 acres in Muskegee Creek territory in Northern Georgia, that we now call Acorn Center for Restoration and Freedom. I'm so excited to be sharing so much more with you about this work, and I will pass it to Shaye.
Gwadzi Hopa, Shai Lucero Ese, Koikame Akumesta, Frashka Hanoetzina Washtisada. Good evening, folks. It is a special day for my Pueblo people. My name is Shai Lucero. I'm from the Pueblos of Acoma and Laguna. I am Roadrunner Clan for my mother and a turkey child for my late father. And I am currently in my floral shop located on the Pueblo of Laguna lands in the state of New Mexico in the United States of America. And I always put USA because sometimes New Mexico is one of the 50 that are missing, and people often leave us out of the listing. So I always make sure it says USA. I am lucky to have grown up and lived here on my ancestral homelands of the Pueblo of Acoma and the Pueblo of Laguna. And so I do want to acknowledge that my adopted sister, really good sister, Sierra, is in the room. And so it made me feel good to see her there because she has been a huge part of our family. And when we talk about grief and we talk about different trauma, it's different for Pueblo people, and the subject of death varies among the tribes, the indigenous peoples. Some tribes see it as a taboo, and there's a lot of ceremony that will go on when it comes time for a person to begin journeying to the creator, or as some of my northern relatives say, the other side camp. And so um, my sister Sierra has been part of our recent grief. My father had end-stage renal failure, and he was on the kidney transplant list at the Mayo Clinic for several years to get a kidney. What we later found out that his enzyme markers were very rare. My dad was a very rare person, but his enzyme markers made him even more rare, and so it was going to be like 0.1% for him to even get a kidney. And in March of March of 2020, right when the pandemic started, my dad got sick and had to be transported to a hospital 40 miles away because we're in rural New Mexico. And I always tell people he didn't die of COVID, but he died because of COVID. And while the medical system was really so busy trying to tend to COVID patients, my dad was neglected, and a lot of that contribute to his morale. And he basically, we believe he gave up, and it was just tired as well. And so to grieve during a time of pandemic was very different for us as well. Again, it was the height of the pandemic. Funerals were my dad's death was the first funeral in on our tribal lands, and we were able to bring him home. And he stayed with us for 5 hours before he transitioned. And as we were waiting for the ambulance to take him so that we could prepare the house and prepare for his funeral the next day, because in our Pueblo people, our burials happen really quick. Um, the fire chief and the police chief were outside our house asking, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, it's not what we want to do, it's what can we do? And so my dad was very well known in the community, whereas if we had a regular funeral, I'm sure our street, our home would have been filled with hundreds and hundreds of people, whereas only 15 family members surrounded my dad during the wake. So we had to have people were calling constantly, and it was my mom and I sat and we're like, well, how do we allow people to grieve when they can't come be with my dad while watching over him? So we put a call out on social media, and when we were talking to people, we're like, celebrate my dad the way you feel you should celebrate. So we had our Jewish friends sit in Shiva. We had friends down, our relatives down at Salt River tribe. They had all night ceremonies for my dad. In Guatemala, they had ceremony going for him with the Mayan people. And various people were celebrating my dad's life. And we, as a florist, for my people, I'm there to in their initial time of grief. And as learning with the Corandismo medicine, I've learned to take that initial time of grief and turn it into a plática. And the plática is a heart-to-heart talk that you have with your client. And when they call me, they're in their first stage of grief. They're needing flowers, they're needing things done immediately. So I really take that time to sit and listen to them and say, what was your family member like? Did they have a favorite color, a favorite flower, a favorite movie, different type of music? And then for me, that helps me in my designing process. As a matter of fact, today I just did funeral flowers for a young man who passed from asthma, and he loved hip hop. So I was like, okay, I'm not much of a hip hop person, but I played some hip hop and I had no idea who I was listening to, but it was in his genre because for me, it felt like, well, I was designing the emotions that I was feeling were going to land on the flowers. And that was really important to me. So when it came time to really, when the grieving process of my father, which was my first real big initial, my late brother had passed away, 25 years ago, and then that was a whole different my that was a whole different grieving, but it was my dad. This was my father, my daddy, I was real close to him. So it for me, I had to even use the platica on myself to say, Shai, how are you going to go forward in your grief? And, and just remember those lessons of cuarentismo, but also remaining to those Pueblo ties. And so for me, it's just as a florist for my community, I really take that time to be really special when I work with my clients, and talk to them in that grief process. Um, but I will continue the conversation, and I'm so honored to be here, and I will pass the mic to Carlos.
Thank you. My name is Carlos Plasola. My pronouns are he and him. I have dark hair, light brown skin, a little bit of a beard, glasses, Mexican, and behind me is a collage of things that I hold sacred to myself in my journey. It's a pleasure to be here sharing the stage with you, Shai and Emmanuel. And Andy, I'm grateful for you inviting me on such an important topic and to reimagine, to giving voice to folks like us. And very much grateful for that. It doesn't happen too often. So thank you for all the care you've taken to set this up. In terms of who I am, perhaps better to explain what I am. I stand here in this moment with four directions. One is those who put me here, or the ancestors, those behind me, who gave rise to me. That which is beneath my feet, Great Mother, Mother Earth, nature. That above me, Spirit, the infinite, where my ancestors live and guide me and speak to me from. And that which is before me, which is the future, our children's future. And that's my path. And each step I take is in honor of all of those. I'll start my own journey with you all here in describing my ancestry. My people come from Mexico, indigenous, from rural lands of Mexico, and they immigrated to the United States. So I also represent the voice of the immigrant who's been detached in many ways from ancestry, from our stories, from our tribal names, from our languages, often because of hostile takeovers of our rural lands. We were farmers. We came as farm workers. We were displaced from farmlands of Mexico as a result of imperialism from our own government, as well as American government intruding into Mexican politics throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we displaced from our lands. We came to the US. My people arrived. We were farm workers. We struggled as farm workers, and all of the trauma and grief that comes with being farm workers, poverty, violence, aggression, and the struggles of poverty. Early on in a death of my grandmother, it dawned upon me that it was something very significant when I asked my mother, where did she go? And my mother said, she went to heaven where she'll live forever. And that night I tried to reconcile what it meant to live forever, and I tried to grasp the infinite. And my brain as a 7-year-old child was simply too um, uh, inexperienced perhaps to grasp what the infinite was, and it tormented me for about 2 decades longer, with losing sleep, trying to grasp the infinite and nothingness, death. And so, nevertheless, it did help me really appreciate life, and more importantly, really appreciate this planet that we live on, and the fragility of life. I got my bachelor's degree in biology and anthropology, my master's in environmental science. I truly am in service to the Great Mother and to life and creation, and have been since as long as I can remember, in awe of creation. That's my that's my past. That's my grounding. Somewhere, my mother died in 2013, and just before that, my father died. Just before that, my stepfather died. Several cousins died, all around that same time frame. But it was really the death of my mother that destabilized everything that I thought was my grounding. My brother and sister also became very destabilized, and we didn't know how to hold each other because of the struggles that we had as young people. We were ill-equipped to hold each other in goodness, and so relationships began to break. And I stood and wondered, what could I have done? How could I have been more supportive? And in the end, it was really that I carried so much trauma from really my ancestral story, my intergenerational trauma. Despite all my struggles, and despite my thinking that I was ready to handle anything, I was not. And so for about 4 years after that, I reeled with struggle, with self-annihilating thoughts, with cosmic nihilism, the sense that nothing means anything. We're all just here in some tragic comedy. That even with my own children, I'm married with 3 children, and I couldn't find any meaning or joy in their presence. I knew something was wrong with me. And then I heard about these beautiful things called plant medicines, sacred plants, ancestral sacred plants, what we know as psychedelics or entheogens. And I went in and had a journey with mushrooms. And after about 2 years of deep meditation, trying to heal and being stuck in what's known as a default mode network, or deep trauma, trigger responses to distress, I would be activated easily. I read about mushrooms, so I went into a mushroom journey and had a deep mushroom journey, 5-gram journey, closed the door behind me, and went in and had a beautiful conversation with spirit. And that brings me to my third direction, which is my deep connection with spirit. I'd always assumed the existence of spirit, but that conversation that I had really took me to another level of understanding that spirit is real, that the infinite is real, that the world and the universe is not finite, and therefore everything continues to exist. And in that process began my healing journey, in conversing with my mother, conversing with my ancestors, grounding myself through plant medicine. And that enabled me to start a movement with others called Decriminalized Nature Movement, which seeks to liberate these plant medicines so anyone can have access to these without having to pay money for access, that they can grow their own, gift their own. And that brings me to the future. I've always walked with the intention of doing right by those who will come after me, but this took it to a different level. My walk now in this plant medicine journey is really about liberating consciousness through these plant medicines, which really bring the message of spirit through them. And so that's been my journey, to liberate these plants in order to liberate humanity, to understand what we're doing to our great mother and to each other. So thank you for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to the conversation. If I may ask a question, Emmanuel, you left off on creating the Acorn Center. I'm wondering if you could share with us a bit more about what you do there.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for sharing. Yeah, I mean, What I say that we do is we create possibility and new worlds. What that looks like on an everyday basis is that we provide free healing and wellness sessions, both online, and then we offer the land as a space of retreat, restoration, and creativity to our community. What's been really beautiful about the work of Acorn is that it's evolving, right? Like, so anything that is connected to the land is going to take on the nature of adaptability and evolution. So there's no staticness in it. And so I always tell people, like, the work looks a little bit different every year. But the themes of helping people be inside of their possibility, helping people see freedom, are really connected. When we first started, we didn't have land. And I was doing this work more on a place-based way in conferences and in cities in the South. And once we got our land in 2019, it really shifted the way that the work could be held, both by me, but also by community. And I think people stop having the thought about Acorn in their mind, but they could come and be with it. They could literally see the transition and transformation that the land has gone under over the last 3 years to become this retreat center space, to become this holding place. They could talk to the trees, and they could sit with the grass, and they could be with bird medicine, and they could forage in our natural spaces and find reishi and onions and burdock, and they could do all the things that we were talking about practicing for the 3 years before. They could do them and just physically come and do them. So that's what we do. What is the next evolution of our work, which is really, really exciting, which is my Aquarius stuff, is like, if I can do it, everybody can do it. So we will be evolving to invite other people who are BIPOC folks, queer and trans folks, into the process of becoming land stewards. And Shaye, I'm curious for you and your people in your work, what is actual land stewardship? I feel like I've learned from a lot of Turtle Island Indigenous folks about what that is. And so I'd love to hear what you would call land stewardship, and how it's practiced and how it's important to your people.
Thank you for the question, because I was going to actually ask, have a talk about, because Carlos mentioned displacement. You talked about looking for access to land. I'm very lucky because my people were never forcibly removed from their land. With this is where we came from. This is where we emerged from, and so for Pueblo people, we migrated from, Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, but we didn't migrate very far. This is where Creator put us. Carlos had talked about displacement. My husband is actually Cherokee and Chickasaw. And so for me, having him, being partnered with him, and us raising our family here in Acoma Laguna, has, we have a connection to land. We are able to go out into the fields anytime to collect medicine if we need to. If we just want to go out and scream or cry or whatever, we don't have to go very far, because because it's our land. Now, my husband is a visitor, even though he's lived here, 20 some years. Sometimes he feels like a visitor. And it was really evident when a few years ago we went to Cherokee, North Carolina, and my husband, one of the elders from Eastern Band of Cherokee, took our family to Kitua, which is their place of emergence. And for me, I felt what it felt like to be a visitor to his land. And my kids and my husband were, I mean, the water was going fast. It was flowing fast from the snow melt. I was nervous. They weren't nervous. They were running around. They were so connected to Kitua. And then it was at that point where I really felt, okay, this is what it means to be displaced. This is what people feel. And I think that displacement really affects how people are able to practice medicine. They're not able to practice fully. They're not able to practice wholeheartedly. There's always going to be something missing. And so when it comes to land stewardship for our people, we're always trying to take in mind that we have to protect the land for 7 generations. That's kind of a common theme in Indian country, is you have to protect that land for 7 generations. And it's not just protection of the land, it's the air, it's the water, it's the quality of the soil, it's how you leave your footprint on the earth. It's recycling. It's using, like in my shop, I don't throw the greens or the cuttings from my flowers and the greens. I compost them. I return them to earth. The water that we use for the buckets for the plant food, I water the plants outside my mom and my yard. It's return. Always returned back to the earth, and those are common practices I've tried to put in my own shop, and then our family has instilled within ourselves. And then when it comes to medicine, studying Corendismo medicine, which is the Mexican of our Southern brothers and sisters, it really made me focus like, okay, I can learn about Corendismo, I can learn about the plants of the South, but what if I don't have access to it? So that made me even more connected and more um, put that importance to me that I have to learn the medicine of what surrounds me. I have to learn that. And not to be stingy, because I used to be really stingy with my knowledge. I was like, no, I'm protecting it. But my dad told me one time, he goes, if you go to creator with all this knowledge, creator's going to ask you, well, how come you didn't share it? It's worthless to me up here, but it could have been worth more to the people, back at home. And so, for that connection really made me think about, okay, I can't be stingy anymore. I have to learn different ways to protect my people. And I also always have to recognize that displacement of people. And Carlos, I wanted, ask you about, what it feels like, or, your because you proudly mentioned that you represent the immigrant people, and that's a subject that a lot of is often not recognized. Is that kind of displacement as an immigrant, and I'm sure, Emmanuel, your ancestors, you know. Your African ancestors are also displaced as well. But I wanted to ask you, Carlos, can you talk a little bit more about that, how it turns into how you practice, how you lead life, and how we, as those that aren't immigrants, can really think about like our actions and how to be a little more understanding of that process.
Thank you, Shaya. Yeah, the first time that I really understood what we lost as people in having to immigrate to survive, I felt deep, deep sorrow and sadness for the loss. And I'm still in mourning. But it came, and first of all, I want to recognize that much of the world's population are immigrants out of necessity. And this goes all the way back to even Northern Europe, people immigrating as a result of pressure. And it's been the story of humanity for so long. And the story here in America can be told through the story of Emmanuel's ancestors, through my ancestors, being displaced from lands. But it really hit me what it meant one day when I was in ceremony with a very dear brother of mine, Shane, and Shane lives on the La Jolla Reservation in Southern California. And we were sitting in ceremony one day, and he speaks of the mountains and the rivers as relatives, and of the rocks as relatives. And I asked him one day, how long have your people been in these mountains? And he said, he looked at me like it was a strange question, because it was for him. And he said, forever. This is where we've always been. And in that moment, it just dawned on me, wow, what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. And then the sorrow hit that I will never know what that's like in that way. For my people, due to the need to immigrate. But I did go back with my grandmother, who's here above me, and to her lands in Jalisco, in Auclan area of Jalisco. Nahuatl people are from there. And we left there when I was young. And I sat one day and I looked at the mountains in my own village there. And I thought about how long my ancestors had looked at those very same mountains, and that they, like Shane's ancestors, had always looked at those mountains. And suddenly I got it. Now I understand why they are our relatives, because we have always related to them. People like on your land, Shai, your people have always related to landmarks, to the rivers. They're part of the family, the four-leggeds. And so the stewardship of land, from the perspective that the mountains, the rivers, the four-leggeds are our relatives in the most sincere meaning of that term, is probably about as connected as you can get to a land stewardship connection. And so I really found a lot of personal healing in just understanding that we can reconnect to the lands of our ancestors and begin to tell our own children those stories again.
I think on that theme of stewardship, and what y'all are sharing, Carlos, what you're sharing about displacement and home, again, as like a Black, queer, and trans person, it is like displacement on top of displacement on top of displacement, in many, many ways, right? And so where to even value, and I tell people all the time, I'm a city kid. I did not grow up on land. I grew up in New York City. I was very much like on buses, trains, and subways for most of my life. The city is where actually life makes the most sense for me still. And yet, I think that there is something about this learning about the land that is opening up the communities that I work with, that I serve, that I am of, to this new possibility of reconnecting or just connecting to the land as a resource space. And I get choked up when I think about and like seeing young trans kids come to our land and just laugh with glee in the pool and like go on forage adventures in the forest and talk with the plants and learn how to sit with a tree. I'm like, these are places where we never thought we could be resourced, right? Like, so when we are told, and the journey of both Black folks and trans folks and queer folks is also this journey of being told, like, you're not natural. There's something wrong with you. You're not connected to nature. And so when we get these opportunities to come into deep, intimate contact with nature, it is a restoration of literally our wholeness and our humanity, right? And then we get to be and learn how to then take care of that which has given this stuff that, I have found sitting at base of trees that I've never found with people, right? That I've never found in my own family. I have found with birds that I've never found with people. And so to share that with folks, Shaye, thank you for the reminder of like, yes, of course we would share, right? Like, of course we would share this with our people. I know you both work with land as medicine. I feel like I'm a newbie in that way. When you think about land as medicine, what are some ways that you feel like, what are some things that you feel like you have to like break through? Because, we all still live in this capitalistic, oppressive society, to help other people receive the medicine of the land.
I think what I really learned about in curanderismo medicine is the it was through the use of the ferias de salud, and they would which translates to health fairs, and they would host these ferias in the plazas, in the the mercados, in just on the street. The curanderas would meet, and they you would see limpias and acupuncture and massage happening while the world is going around you. And for me, it was like medicine can happen anywhere. And that was when I really started thinking about how medicine for our people can happen everywhere. And then in learning about the medicinal plants, for me, my initial somewhat, being protective of this knowledge, again, goes back to protecting it from capitalism, because you don't want your plants to be overexploited. You don't want your plants to be overpicked and then processed and then turned into some prescription medicine, and or it's used not in the correct way, and or it's picked in with not the right frame set or not the right offering. And so it's that was kind of some of my initial um protection of the medicine. But then with curandismo medicine, I learned that I needed to work with the people, bring the medicine to the people, and it's even as something as I'm going to stop my video and post here. This is a mask that I created during the pandemic, and it was designed specifically for by. It would request went out by the New Mexico Department of Health, among the citizens of New Mexico, to create masks during the pandemic, and it was for a contest. And so I last minute decided to create this mask, and I gave her the pronouns of she, her, but she is constructed using a blue surgical mask, and I laid the juniper on top. And for our people, the juniper is antiviral, antimicrobial plant that we use in various ways, from smudging to anything for like stomach issues, to miscarriages, to even fumigating your home. And so I put the juniper on top. Then I added the turquoise stones for our Pueblo people. The turquoise stones represent health. And then on the sides, there's four lily grass that are attached to the mask. And then on the mask, on the lily grass strands, there are pieces of mother of pearl, and it was a prayer for rain, because our Pueblo people are always praying for rain, but also so that the rain could wash away the virus, and so that it would cleanse our world of the virus. And so when I create floral designs, I always have come from it from a Pueblo perspective. And it's sometimes it doesn't align with the regular floral industry. It doesn't align with, the stewards or those gatekeepers of the Native American art thinking. And so I've always felt like the odd man out. and or odd person out. And but I still do it. And so for me, using something like the mask, using it as a symbol of promoting medicine, promoting health, and just trying to remind our people that we need to the masks weren't there to, as a something of oppression, but it was also for our family. The masks were that you cared enough about your human relative, that you wore the mask because you had enough care and you had enough empathy for the person around you. And so for me, she became a symbol to a lot of people of so many different ideas. She was part of several campaigns, health campaigns, with the Department of Health, with the Bernalillo County health department. She was part of a Google story. So her image went around all over the place. But I think that if we can show that kind of connection using things of the land to promote the land stewardship, to promote some of these ideas that, you people may think, oh, it's just a mask or it's a piece of art. But if we can create some conversation on ways to do that, it's so important because people need to know their sense of place. People need to know their surroundings, where they come from. And so it's important that groups like, like the Acorn Center, being able to have people reconnect, as you said, city person, hanging out on the land, and just having that reconnection is important. And then, like Carlos, having that reconnection to these sacred medicines of mushrooms. I mean, that's a whole level of medicine and a whole different specialty that I don't have any knowledge for. And I don't, I'm not an expert in, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert in, but it's great to know somebody who I can, eventually consult with, if been asked. But it's, we need to work on using these kind of symbols, these kind of ideas to promote good health, good humanity, good response to, how to treat one another, in with better actions.
Thank you. That is a beautiful mask. Thank you for sharing that, and a beautiful story. Emmanuel, thank you for your question. I, like you, I'm really new and emerging into the more spiritual relationship with the Great Mother and nature. My indoctrination from a very early age, as many people's indoctrination for the last 1,000 years perhaps, has been in the Western perspective of reductionism, separating humans from the rest of nature, right? Somehow we are separate from it, and we reign dominion over the land, and that separates us, which is tragic, from nature as our family. And so for me, one of the big challenges has been, and plant medicine has really helped me to de-indoctrinate or decolonize myself from the concept that I am separate somehow from the tree, from the fish, from the land, as opposed to just seeing myself as a small part of the ecosystem. And I think where this really hit me one day was, so I did plant medicine to decolonize and kind of deconstruct the Western construct of me as separate from even you all. And then in realizing that connection, I got deeper into prayer, as part of my relationship with nature, that spirit is embedded in all of our existence. In every breath, there's spirit is there, and medicine, as Shaya mentioned, is everywhere. And I had gone through a particular journey, and the message was, it's time to plant corn. And then I planted corn, and that's really where my vision started coming in of reconnecting me with ancestry. Now, where that voice came from, I don't know, but it was in prayer, and it came to me, and I planted corn, and it led me back home to my native lands. And when I was there, I understood why it led me there. So I say my most powerful entheogen has been planting corn. And that's where spirit led me. And that the fact that I can commune with spirit in that way in nature now is because I was able to break through those constructs in my mind that I am somehow separate from all of it. Yeah, thank you for the question.
I want to say we're moving now into the section of our table talk. We've got until 15 minutes after the hour, and I wanted to make sure if there were any questions, feel free to go off mute. You can raise your hand using the little symbol, or just raise your hand like this. And we have a question. Fantastic. Dana.
I'm so grateful for this discussion and appreciate all of you so much. I don't even know where to begin. I'm a clinical psychologist, and in my whole doctoral program, there was never anything about somatic, anything about plant, anything, And I was on staff in the Department of Psychiatry at Children's Hospital in Oakland for a while. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we just medicate the symptoms so much. And in 2019, I got a certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies and research at CAIS, and my eyes were open. And I've done training with ketamine and cannabis and psilocybin in the Netherlands. And I'm so hopeful that we can destigmatize and find ways to really respect Indigenous wisdom and kind of right the wrongs, for lack of a better way to say it. And in that vein, I really appreciate, Carlos, you talking about how all of us, like, it's a land of immigrants. I'm Jewish myself, identified culturally, but my grandpa was from Thessaloniki, from Greece, and I never realized why he spoke Ladino when the Jews were booted out of Spain. And my bubby on the other side is from Odessa, suffering again. And so I feel like the more we can have compassion and turn towards each other, this is my question. I was really impressed with you saying that you want to share your wisdom. I think there's a tendency to say, you know, there's been so much disrespect in the past and you want to keep what's yours. And there's a woman named Pam Crisco who has a program called Roots to Thrive. And she shared an anecdote. I'm at a conference I went to at Horizons in Portland in September, and there was an Indigenous person who said, how can I heal with all these white people, you know? And then later through their work said, it's really the only way I can, you know? And so with this desire to turn toward and to focus on what we all have in common, I just wonder if you guys have any thoughts about, I don't know if action steps is too weird a phrase, or just like how, in your opinion, can we all start to work with each other and for each other in service, you know, with heart. And before you guys move on, I wanted to say, for people starting to try medicine on their own and who may not be very familiar, there's a hotline, a confidential anonymous hotline called Fireside Project. And I just wanted this group to know about that. You can call at any time if you are having a journey or sitting for someone or processing a journey, and it's confidential, anonymous, free. That's Fireside Project. And then there's also this Chilean couple, friends of mine, who have it's called Green Magic Yoga, and they offer virtual journeys, and you don't need a degree or credential to be able to learn about all this. And so just with gratitude for all of you who are doing the work. Thank you.
Real quick, for one of, you know, you were talking about how we can treat one another. One of the lessons that I was taught when I was a little girl by my grandpa was a Pueblo teaching of look at your hands. I have a TED Talk. I covered it in my TED Talk on about look at your hands. But for it's a lesson that shows that, you know, everything you've done in life is shown on your hands. And so when you go to creator's going to see a look at your hands. He's going to he or she is going to ask to look at your hands. And so you're going to show your hands to creator. And if there's marks on them, that shows that you weren't a good person. So whether you were greedy, whether you were mean, whether you didn't take responsibility for these actions. And it's that lesson itself has really helped me in when I've faced racism, when I've faced, people have done me dirty, I have to go back, do I want to have an action that's going to leave a mark on my hands, or do I work really hard to be the good person, and which is sometimes harder to do. But for me, I just wanted to pass on that lesson of look at your hands that my grandpa told me when I was a little girl. So, I don't know if Carlos or Emmanuel have any
Thank you.
other.
Yeah, somebody put a link to your TED Talk. So thank you for sharing that. We'll look forward to watching that.
I think that there's so much value in the both and, right? So most of my work, right, like a core of the work that I do is really helping people address internalized depression. and really saying, how can we meet the conditions with our whole hearts, our whole selves, and what will that shift and change? What I notice inside of that work is, right, like, I think some very respectful white folks who have like gathered around and been like, I mean, is this for us? If this is not for us? And I'm like, absolutely, wholeness is for everyone, right? Like, I'm not gatekeeping anybody's wholeness, right? But then the conversation does become about, and something that we're thinking about for Acorn for 2023 is, how do we invite our white siblings into the space with the same type of understanding of how to be in the space, right? So we've been offering space for retreats for folks for 3 years. And, we've had maybe 4 white folks on the land, and the experiences with those folks have been markedly different than with everyone else who comes to the land. And so it's like, I want to invite you to the land. I also may need to give you a set of protocols about how you might need to be here, right? Because I want you to get access to the medicine, but I'm not willing to disrupt the relationship to the land in order to do that. Like, that's a part of my responsibility as a steward, right? Is to make sure that everyone knows. And again, the things that I have learned from Turtle Island Native and Indigenous folks of like protocol, protocol, protocol. Like, you must come here in this particular way. And being like, oh, now I understand what that is, because I'm not just responsible to me. I'm not even just responsible to the bodies that are there. I'm responsible to 8 acres of land, the ancestors of that land, the animals that thrive on that land, and every last blade of grass, every tree, every mushroom, every creepy crawly thing. And so I can't have people come without giving them some protocols to be there as a place where Black, queer, and trans liberation and freedom is at the center of it. So that's a different set of protocols.
I really, really appreciate you basically, in my view, setting boundaries and, honoring what's sacred. Because I think sometimes we're taught like, oh, it's rude if this, or you're not being inclusive if that, when you're setting boundaries. I wanted to also add that I have a trans kid who is identifying non-binary. Like, we're just all on this journey together. And that made me think about Two-Spirit. Like, is it really something new, or are we just returning back to what was honored and respected so long ago? And then this past 500 years or so, I don't know. Anyway, sorry, tangent, but I just want.
Well, I wanted to just answer your question this way. When Shai first and I were first introduced, she did something very kind, which was she asked me where my ancestors were from. And that's a beautiful thing, because then we get to know each other beyond just our present here in the Western world as cogs, as occupations. And it's something that I also do with people that I meet new, is I express curiosity about, where are you from? Where are your ancestors? Because I love the idea, and it's very healing to meet where our ancestors walked together. Because before there was all the division that comes from Westernism, and I understand the benefits of Westernism, but there's also a lot of downsides. And one of those is separating us according to skin color, separating us according to occupations. But when we start walking in the land of our ancestors, we realize we all came from farmers. We all came from hunters. We all came from people who revered the land. We all came from people who sustained themselves with the land. And it gives us a place of unifying together. So I think that's a great way of breaking down barriers, is connecting at that place.
I want to acknowledge that there's some questions in the chat from Alex and also from Ash. Alex or Ash, if you want to unmute and ask your question directly, you're welcome to. I can also read it from the chat.
Yeah, I can unmute myself. Sorry, I don't have my camera on. I'm doing a hair oil treatment right now and look a little tore up. But so thank you guys all for your time and your energy, and like so much. I was taking so many notes because it just really resonated with me. I'm a young adult and my heritage is Pasquayaki and Mescalero Apache. And my question, and I wanted your guys' insight, is because from my Yaqui grandmother, I was given a lot of plant medicinal knowledge growing up, which I'm so grateful for, because she's since passed. But me now being a millennial, I have access to things she didn't have, like the internet. And so, and social media. And so I'm finding all of these other people from around the world who have amazing plant medicine as well, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, you name it, goes on and on from around the world. There's beautiful plants everywhere. I want to stay away from going into that and online ordering and capitalism. But so my question is, do I turn away from these specific plants that are not in my region? Do I attempt to grow my own if the climate is similar? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know morally how I feel. So insight would be, appreciated.
In some of the classes that my mother and I have taught regarding the medicinal plant use, one, we present the plants that we have knowledge of that are from our local area, and we've had people ask for seeds to try growing it in different ecological areas, and we highly discourage it because we don't know if that plant's gonna proliferate or it's going to become invasive, and how you have to think about if you're going to plant something that is not native to your area. How are the birds, how are the animals going to react to it? How is the environment going to react to it? You have to think about it in terms of long term, not just your immediate need. It has to be thought about in long term. And so what we do is we encourage people to learn about the medicinal plants wherever they are from. There are where you have a connection with your Yaqui family with those medicinal plants, and you may not have access to it all the time, but it's really important to connect to the plants from your area. Learn your sense of place, learn your place, learn what is happening around you, because then that will give you that connection to the area that you are currently living in. Then if you have a chance to go to your Yaqui family, learn from them as well, and then receive the medicine from them directly as well. Have your Yaqui family take you out to go foraging. But it's really important if you're trying to bring some of these medicinal plants from different areas and trying to transplant them. You have to think about what are the long-term ecological and environmental effects that you are bringing to that area. And so so we've that's one thing we've had to learn, because there were some plants that were brought to New Mexico area who they were supposed to be plants that were to hold for soil, for soil conservation, but they've turned out to be water suckers. And so now they become invasive, and they're lowering our water tables. And we're already high desert. We already have lack of water, and now we're having to fight a plant that was planted that was supposed to help our area. And we're now fighting, and our birds, our animals do not like this plant as well. And they can't eat it, they can't use it, it can't really be used by the animals that are from this area. So for me, it's just try to learn from the plants from your where you're living now.
Yeah, I would add it's great to learn the plants of your area and the ecology of your area, and totally agree. Introducing non-native plants can definitely be a challenge. And here I live in the hills in Oakland, so I spend a lot of time removing what's known as broom brush, as it overrides some of the native plants, and eucalyptus completely kills native plants, all plants underneath them. they're beautiful, but they kill the plants beneath them. So definitely important. And this is, I think, for all humanity, we need to ground ourselves more in our local local ecosystems. But I do think there's room for like indoor cultivation. We do grow a lot of plants indoors that are maybe tropical. And so if there is a spiritual connection to a plant, and so for me, there's a deep spiritual connection, for example, to peyote, which is my ancestral plant coming from the region where my family's from in Coahuila, in Guanajuato, northern Guanajuato and Coahuila. And so, but that would be more indoors and in a more controlled environment. And so I think that's also, what does spirit call you to do is some of it.
Ash, I wanted to just respond really quickly. I put some things in the chat, but I think this opportunity to learn the ancestral stories. So I'm living in the South. My people are not from the South. And I found that learning other people's ancestral stories, whatever they're willing to share, helped me to develop a real deep appreciation for a plant that might be more native to this land and more native to the environment that I'm actually in. So as well as, like my mother had a really deep ancestral relationship to Palo Santo. And I was like, oh, why we, like everybody was like, oh, Palo, don't burn it. And I was like, but my mother's been burning this forever. How could I not? Like, it's how I communicate with her. But like actually reclaiming those stories for self, which comes through like a whole lineage of things, has been really important. Chris Izaguirre and Karen Rose are both two people who I really go to, who have really, I've learned a lot about how to connect ancestry and plant medicine. Thank you all.
At the University of New Mexico, every summer they have a Corandismo program that is open in June. So that can also have a way of helping you connect to Corandismo medicine, but also to give you an idea of how to go to your elders, how to reconnect back to your people. In that class through the University of New Mexico, it's not just specifically for indigenous or Mexican. It's open to everybody, but it's a great program, and it's in the summer, every summer. So and then you get to connect with the healers that do come up from Mexico at the time. So that's another resource there.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes left. I might ask a question about activism. We've talked a lot about nature as a modality for healing. And I'm curious in what ways your work in doing acts of service or activism itself is part of that process for transformation, for growth, for healing.
To me, it's the growth and the healing is the strategy, right? When we talk about, when we talk about, for example, reparations in the Black community, is a Black diasporic question on the table right now. And what I always say about that is like, how complete of reparations are we looking for? Money is great. Land is awesome. And also who is actually looking to be in right relationships with the global Black community, right? Is where I find myself. So for me, the healing is the strategy, because when my people are able to heal more, when they're able to sit with the land more, that sense of worthiness of like what I deserve, what I can ask for, how creatively I can address the oppressions and the traumas that I'm gonna face on a daily basis, is what we get access to. It literally is the full circle for me of like, I am an engine of possibility. I want people to know that no matter what their conditions are, it is possible for them to move against or move with their community or move under or move on top of or move through, right? Like whatever that's going to look like for them. So for me, it is the strategy of activism. The more we're more whole, the more we can meet these conditions with our whole selves. I'm really excited about the days when our activism is generated from a holistic, abundant space and not a space that is rooted in fear and scarcity.
Well, any final words from Carlos or Shaye?
Just on that point, I'll first of all thank you, Shaye, Emmanuel, and Andy. Wonderful to share the stage with you. Thank you to everybody. It's really been an honor and a blessing. I'd say activism, again, detaching things. We like to break things apart in the West. The medicine path is a daily walk. It's when you see injustice, you act to remedy injustice. It's the walk of the Bodhisattva in ancient Hindu tradition and Buddhist tradition. It's a walk, right? You walk with compassion when you see something that hurts others. You take action. It's active, and that's the daily walk. And you can do it in every walk of your life. So that's, yeah.
I think activism for me is being able and brave enough and strong enough to reclaim your language, your culture, your traditions, in all aspects. It's not just the way of life, whether it pertains to medicine. I am on the board for a group called the Change It Women Initiative, and our work is to reclaim the traditional birth practices of indigenous people in the area. And we're working with other midwives, traditional midwives. For particular, right now we're working with midwives in Hawaii who are facing criminalization for practicing traditional midwifery. There's a bill on the table in the state of Hawaii that wants to criminalize midwifery, and so we're working with them to stop that. We were just recently at the UN regarding maternal reproductive health. But there's, but what happens, I think, in Native America, and a lot of people need to realize, is that there's a intersectionality of all our issues. It is not separated, like Carlos says. When you talk about maternal health, you're talking about, things like, domestic violence, the Violence Against Women Act. You're talking about missing murdered Indigenous people. You're talking about the man camps that are as a result of, land distractions. You're talking about, everything. It has all intersectionality. And so we have to realize that life is a full of intersectionality and it can't be separated. And I think that once we realize that as activists, is that we have to, yes, you have one cause, but your one cause also affects everybody else. And I think when we come to that realization for activism, that our cause, we need to work with one another, then I think it's going to be even more powerful than just standing up for that one cause.
Amen to that. Shaye Lucero, Carlos Plazola, Emmanuel Brown, thank you for your brilliance. Thank you for your beauty. Thank you for making this solstice so meaningful for all of us at Reimagine. I hope to see all of you soon. We still have more events at the end of the year, so join us. Come to our vigil on January 4th. We'll send out the follow-up email hopefully by Friday, so y'all get it. And wishing everyone a beautiful evening. Thank you.